Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good to have everyone here again. Pleasure for me to be here. I actually missed it last year because I was out of town. So I was here a couple of years ago. One or two of the slides from here you may actually recognize, so don't call me out on that. In addition, I'd just like to point out, to being the Vice President of Development for Java SE, I'm also the chairperson of the OpenJDK Governing Board. And those are both titles I'm quite happy with. This is a requisite legal slide. There will be a quiz. And this is just to tell you a little bit about what it's like to be in management in the kind of position that I have. Okay, any questions? It is what it is, that's right. So, having said that, or not, I wanted to talk just a little bit about what our priorities are for Java. And this is something that we kind of get asked about a lot. I think, a few years ago, the questions that we got constantly were, what does Oracle think about Java? Does Oracle care about Java? Why should I believe that Oracle wants to make sure that Java continues to be strong, and why does Oracle want to invest in Java? And so basically this is something that we put together fairly early in order to help actually people internally in the team kind of understand what is it that we're trying to do here, and what do we think is important. First of all, one of the things that we recognized was that Java is a language and a platform that's been very, very strong for many years. I don't know if any of you saw the latest RedMonk analysis of popularity of languages that just came out last week. Java is still at the top there. And this is something that doesn't happen without a lot of hard work behind the scenes. For Oracle, this is something I think Larry Ellison actually said in one of the first interviews that he did about the acquisition of Sun, that Java was one of the key things, one of the key reasons that Oracle was interested in buying Sun. And so in fact, there's a tremendous recognition at the highest levels of Oracle that Java is something that is unique and very, very important, and something that we have to take care of and look after. And the reason, I think, is quite simple. If you sort of look at the first bullet on the next point, Oracle actually has, I like to say, Oracle has a few billion reasons to care a lot about Java. And that's because all of Oracle's middleware is written in Java. There's a tremendous investment that's been made in Java and in using Java over the years at Oracle. And so, of course, if Java is no longer relevant, then it's a lot harder for Oracle to hire people. It's a lot harder for us to convince customers that our technology is state-of-the-art and will continue to be going forward. So, if you think about it logically, there are a lot of really, really solid reasons for Oracle to invest in Java. In addition to that sort of indirect revenue that we get, we also care a lot about it because we think that there's a good potential for direct revenue. And so I want to be clear on this. One of the first sort of obvious things is we've started to offer enterprise support. And this is something that never kind of really existed before. Essentially, in the old days, if you found a bug in Java, you could go and you could report it. And if you were lucky, maybe it might get fixed. And maybe that fix might go into a release sometime. And maybe the release that it went into wouldn't have a bunch of other fixes that cause problems that you didn't want. Enterprise support is really about people having the option to say, I'd like to pay you, I'd like to get good support, I'd like to know that when I come with a problem, it'll be taken seriously, it will be dealt with quickly, and I'll be able to get a patch that fixes my problem and not everything else in the world that might break me. And so this is important for people who are users of Java, but it's also something that's important for everyone in this room. If you're writing something that's going to run on the JVM, you want to know that people are going to be able to have that option of getting support that will help if they do run into issues. Anyone who's serious about running something in a mission critical setting will want this capability, right? It's not for everyone, but for the people who do want it, that's something that's there now. Another thing that we've been working on is value-added features. So while we're going ahead and continuing to make Java available for free of charge, and intend to continue doing that, we're also looking at the kinds of features that enterprises running in a mission-critical setting want to have, and we're working on those, and we're making those available in for-charge licensing options. And I think that that's something that actually makes sense. It enriches the offering that's there. It gives people an opportunity to get access to technology that they like, that probably not everyone in the world needs, but a certain class of enterprise user needs. And then over time, many of those kinds of things may actually become things that are sort of more generally useful and just kind of go into the base of the platform. In some cases, there's sort of a base that goes in where a certain level of service is there from the get-go, and if you have really, really advanced needs, then you might get that through a license. So I wanted to bring that up and make sure people are aware of that. And then, the final reason, of course, or the final priority for us is increasing efficiency for Java developers. And this is something that, of course, benefits Java developers and other developers, throughout the industry. But it's also something that's kind of selfish, because Java actually has tens of thousands of Java developers. And so anything that we do to make them more efficient actually makes the entire company work better. A final part of that is actually investing in the infrastructure that we use to build Java itself. And so this is something that we've been doing and will continue to do, because clearly, the more efficient we can be in developing Java, the faster you can get out new versions and the faster you can get access to new features. So on the OpenJDK side, we've made, I think, a bunch of progress in the last year. The funding of OpenJDK, both from Oracle and from other companies and individuals, is greater than it's ever been. I was actually looking at some statistics on Olo, which were kind of impressive enough that I wasn't confident that they're right. So I didn't put them on here. If you want, you can have a look yourselves and see what I mean. I think what's important here is that not only do we have a lot of people contributing, but some of the contributions that we have coming in represent really substantial bodies of work. And so just as an example of some of the things that have come into JDK 8 from sources other than Oracle employees, we have JSR 3.10, date and time APIs. We have 3.08, the type annotations, and also, as we quite often do, some great updates for concurrency from Doug Lee and company. Going forward, we intend to continue the practice of having the reference implementation for JDK 8 be based on OpenJDK. This, of course, was a step that we took in JDK 7. What this means is that the playing field is very level. The Oracle JDK implementation has to measure up to the OpenJDK implementation, just as all other commercial implementations do. The updates for JDK 8, just as we've done in 7, will be done through open development. So this is something that means that you not only get transparency and insight into what's happening in the next major release, you also get it into the update releases for the current major line. And this is actually something that I think a lot of people find very useful. Basically not just getting a bunch of source code thrown over the wall once a release comes out, but actually being able to see each change as it's happening and as it goes in, and see development in progress, and be able to track that and understand what's going on and learn from it, and make contributions. And then finally here, we already, I don't know how many people have been following the JEP process. This is something that we put in place about a year ago in order to have transparency not only into what has happened, but also into what could happen in the future. So this is a way for members of OpenJDK to propose ideas, and for groups to be able to sort of discuss ideas, what they would mean, what it would take to to actually get them into the product, as well as what capabilities they would offer people. And so this is sort of a way for people to take part in the planning. We already do have, in addition to doing JEPs for all of the features in JDK 8, there are also JEPs already for features that are proposed or will likely come into releases past 8, so into 9 and 10 and so on. And then finally, we now have, I think, established fairly securely in OpenJDK a pipeline of improvements to the infrastructure. We already have an open wiki. There's a new build system that's been introduced that pretty dramatically cuts down build times. And then we've been continuing to build to add to the set of JTReg tests, and are well on our way to the open database and having a system for code reviews that's a little bit more support than just using WebRes. So again, in the interests of transparency and people being able to take part, I think we've made some firm steps in the right direction and will continue to do so going forward. So very quickly on JDK 8, I actually usually when I give talks, I ask people to raise hands. I expect the distribution to be a little bit different in this room. So how many people are still using JDK 6? Okay, let's say how many people are primarily using JDK 6? Okay, primarily using 7? Okay, and how many people are regularly using JDK 8 early access builds now? Yeah, so as you can imagine, the distribution in this sample is a little bit more skewed towards using JDK 8. I'm very glad to see that. But actually, usually when I ask this, the way that in more sort of end user developer centered conferences, it tends to be a smattering of people running 6. Very few people. The majority of people using 7. And there are always a few people who have been trying 8. So, what I usually do when I'm talking to groups like that is I try to encourage them to start trying out 8 and using it and giving us feedback. And that's in part because of some of the great features that are coming in, but it's actually mainly because of this. And this is taken directly from the OpenJDK site. Basically, a lot of dates and scary words, and what do these all mean? Well, essentially, what this means is that on JDK 8, we're now at a point where we are feature complete, but we're in the stabilization phase. It's a fairly long stabilization phase, but our experience is that you actually want to have a fairly long stabilization period for a major release of the JDK. And this is in part to make sure that the implementation is as good as it can be, but it's also because we want to make sure that the APIs are as solid as they can be, right? When a major version comes out, we do a bunch of work around the specification in the JCP. The expert groups are very active up until, in many cases, the last minute. And this is because we want to make sure that the APIs are as good and as solid as they can be before coming out. And so there's sort of a bunch of work there. For the JDK, we do things kind of hand in hand, working on the specification, working on the implementation, and quite often, things that seem a good idea in the specification turn out to have implementation problems, and that should sort of inform the direction of the spec, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of the schedule that we have. There's a bit of time and leeway towards the end because we know by experience that that's often needed. But the main thing to keep in mind is that right now is a pretty darn good time to be testing 8 and telling us about issues. It's late enough that the functionality is there that you want to try. It's mostly working pretty well, but there are probably issues, and if we know about the issues now, then there's ample time to be kind of figuring out what things are most important to fix and doing our best to fix those things. One of the things that we want to try to avoid is something where a bunch of people come and sort of start testing in late January and report issues to us at a time when it may actually be too difficult for us to fix something in time. And we do while we don't completely stare blindly at this GA date, it is something that we do want to meet. And we want to meet it because ultimately we want to get to a point where we have a lot of predictability. Right? For the entire industry, it can be very good to know when to anticipate something coming, when people think they're going to need to do a bunch of testing of their applications and hopefully just certification to make sure they can roll this new technology out. And we can actually only get to that if we can establish a good cadence and a high degree of predictability for that cadence. And the way to do that is essentially to say what dates we have and do our best to hold those. Now, as we all know, sometimes there are extraneous circumstances and things come up that force us to re-examine that. When that happens, what we try to do is we try to do that as far in advance as possible. And so, some of the sort of original things that have happened with changes to the JDK 8 date, we did our best to try to make sure that that wasn't happening kind of the day before or the week before a release was meant to come out. But it was actually something that we were anticipating far in advance and giving people lots of notice so they could take it into account for their plans. So having said that, I think we're very confident about this schedule, and we hope that everyone in this room will be helping by testing the things that you're running on 8 and letting us know if you run into issues. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the areas that we're thinking about for the future, so you have an idea of the sort of general directions we're going, and can kind of tell us if you have any thoughts about this or things you think we should take in mind. This is actually, kind of simple. One very large area that we think about is Java in the data center, and by extension these days that means kind of in the cloud. So the things that we're looking at there are the kinds of issues that people are telling us about when they try to run Java in a cloud environment, or where they're trying to get the most that they can out of a data center, and find right now that unless they take an extreme amount of care to build in multi-tenancy in their application, it doesn't just happen, right? And so as a result, people sort of experience that, they use sort of a JVM process as their unit of isolation. And then as a result, they often take up what they think is quite a lot of resource for the amount of computing that they're doing. And so this is something that we're looking at, trying to think of things that we can do in order to make it so that you get that sort of balance of isolation on the one hand and sharing on the other hand, so that you can kind of do the most that you can with the computing resources that you have. So that's kind of one area that we're thinking about. Another area that we're thinking about is Java's place in the embedded world. And what I mean by that, I think there's been a lot of talk about the Internet of Things and this sort of thing. There are different kinds of promises that analysts are making about how quickly this area will ramp up. I think one of the things that we can all agree on is while we don't know how quickly or it will ramp up or how big it will be, it is actually an area where there's a lot of stuff happening. Just looking around us now, you sort of recognize the fact that while most people tend to have 1, 2, well, okay, in this room maybe 5 mobile phones in their pocket at any time, the number of embedded devices that each of us have kind of surrounding us on a daily basis is far greater than that, right? It's orders of magnitude larger than that. And so, of course, these devices, while in the past they've been sort of small, kind of dumb, not really doing much, kind of having a stack that was very static. The trend is towards these things being more powerful, having more capability, and also being things that are connected, and also being things that are dynamic, where they're actually being updated in many cases. And of course, there's a range from very, very small sensors to architectures that have, kind of multiple tiers. We're seeing a lot of cases where there are sort of middle tiers and that kind of thing even being run, in homes with things like home gateways. And so for us, seeing this trend, we think that, Java actually can play a very, very strong role here. Right? In many ways, you look at sort of what people have to do in those environments now, and they're essentially building an entire software stack each time for each device. And that's, of course, a very, very, very expensive way to go about doing things. You know, we've seen the general trend in sort of desktop and server side has been about standardization and basically making it so that, you know, everyone doesn't write their entire software stack. You kind of agree on a fairly high level that still gives you a lot of power, and then you worry about the particular business application you're trying to deliver. And so there's pretty good reason to believe that a similar kind of thing will happen in this sort of smaller end world over time, that people sort of recognize that it's kind of a waste of time for them to be building an entire software stack. Instead, what they should be doing is figuring out a software stack that gives them access to lots of developers. Okay, so what's a software stack that has the most developers in the world? And also happens to be a stack that has shown that it's pretty darn good at being able to handle differences in underlying operating system and hardware and providing APIs that are consistent that people can use. Okay. C, okay. Good answer. Any others? Yeah, so of course, you know, what I mean by this is that, you know, in many ways these trends sort of drives towards an area that has typically been a strength for Java, or by extension the JVM, you know, in order to actually meet a lot of those needs. So so this, I think, is something that's exciting. It's exciting for us. I think it's also something that's potentially exciting for people who are working on other languages to run on the JVM, because of course the more widespread the JVM is in those areas, the easier it is for you to be able to take your technology and make it available to people for things they're trying to do. Okay? And then I think the final note here is just sort of something that you know, Brian and I realized as we were talking at a conference a couple of months ago. One of the things that we really try to do is, you know, we focus on the APIs. And by that I mean both, you know, APIs in capitals and also APIs in terms of capabilities, and trying to make sure that we keep a high degree of compatibility in our major versions while we're continuing to work on the implementation and make it better and better. What this means is that for people who are out there writing applications, they write their application once and then it continues to get better for free without their having to do any more work. And that's actually, you know, something that I think people have experienced a tremendous amount of value in over the years. Okay, I'll finish with that legal slide again, just to make everyone really scared, and then see if there are any questions.